Hey there, welcome back to AP Psych. This is Unit 7 in my classification, Unit 7B, which focuses on personality and personality perspectives, theories, etc. So this series should be about 4 videos total. In this first video, what I'm going to do is explain the introductory material to the personality unit, as well as tagging on the trait perspective for a personality. So let's go ahead and begin. First thing to think about is really how you define the word personality. So if we were in my class, what I would do is go around the room and have students explain, really not even explain, just state a personality characteristic or personality trait. Then I would go to the next person. And in the past few years, what I've done, just kind of for some fun and just to expose how many personality traits there are, is to have students basically in rows or however they're seated, state a personality characteristic or trait, and then go to the next person. And then the task of kind of like winning this game essentially is to be the last man or woman standing. And you get to that point by not duplicating any answers. So if you can continuously name personality traits until you're the last person standing, if you consider like the whole class going at once is round 1, and maybe by like round 20 or 25, everyone's been eliminated except for you, then you win. But part of the point in doing that is to expose just how many personality traits there are. And one of the things I'm trying to get in my classes to think about is basically how many personality traits are very similar and then which ones are very different. And that's going to become important later when we look at the trait theory perspective. So what actually is a personality trait? It's pretty basic. Basically, you can see here it says to refer to an individual's unique set of consistent behavioral traits. So what makes something consistent and what makes it unique or distinctive? Do you respond the same way over time across all the same situations? That gives you some consistency. Do you have people who have behavioral differences when they're reacting to the same situation? That is what could make something or a trait unique. So for example, if you get really stressed out and one person decides to start crying and another person uses humor to kind of bypass the stress and kind of channel it into something different. Or if you are trapped in an elevator and someone has a panic attack, or if they freak out, if somebody starts crying because they're trapped and they're worried about the doom and gloom of being trapped, somebody might laugh it off like they can't believe how ridiculous that situation is. These are areas where you could measure personality traits and how unique and how consistent something might be. What about where you would see personality assessments, personality tests? So my guess is that if you're watching this video, depending on your age, a lot of people have taken personality tests over the course of their life for a variety of reasons. So some of those reasons are because they were just on social media and they saw something that looked fun. So they're like, hey, I'm going to do that. And, find out which character I align with from Harry Potter or from the Marvel universe or Lord of the Rings or whatever it is. But where you actually see personality assessments used are generally in these 4 areas. So number 1, they can be used to clinically diagnose psychological disorders. So there is a test you'll see at the end of this called the MMPI, and this has been used to clinically diagnose certain psychological disorders. There is vocational counseling, so trying to give people an idea about their future, giving them kind of some job counseling and kind of just figuring out, where they might be considered to be someone who's tapping into their strengths or weaknesses based on the chosen career. So giving them some direction in a career sense. And number 3 is personnel selection in business or industry. And so many places of employment may have prospective employees taking personality tests and then giving them like a color-coded system to say, hey, this is somebody we would want to interview, and this is somebody that maybe we don't. So you might say, if somebody takes an assessment and they land in the green, they're a prime candidate for an interview. If they're in the yellow, it's possible you interview them if you don't have anybody in the green. And then if they're in reds, those might be people that you're going to avoid. So maybe because of the survey, they've shown things that are alarming, such as dishonesty, So you wouldn't want to bring that person into your place of employment. And then the fourth one is just measuring specific traits for research. And so basically using personality assessments, personality tests from a research standpoint. That's the fourth major use. So these are some examples of some personality traits. For example, honest, dependable, moody, etc. There's a really, really long list. So we're going to start transitioning into the trait theory perspective now. But what you'll see happen is that there's a lot of personality traits that basically are pretty similar. For example, irritableness, restlessness, impulsive. There's something in common there with those three traits. And so in order to avoid taking a personality test that is on 1,000 traits or hundreds and hundreds of traits, what can be done is to use factor analysis. So factor analysis is actually going to find that common link between certain personality traits. And then what you're going to do is reduce that amount to a lower level. So instead of having 5 traits, for example, that might be very similar, you reduce that to 1. So instead of having 1,000 traits, maybe you reduce that to 500 or maybe 200. Or where we're first going to really see it with Gordon Alpert's theory, which is going to reduce many, many, many personality traits down to 171 traits. Okay, so 171 personality traits is still quite a lot. Some people would say, I don't want to take a test that's measuring that many. I just want to get some basic ones, some core ones. So factor analysis could be used again. In this case, we have Raymond Cattell's 16 degrees of normal. And so this is going to be 16 personality traits that have been whittled down after looking at that list of 171. But again, in some people's minds, they might think, I don't really want to take a test that's only measuring 16 personality traits. That seems like too many. So what do I do? Well, this is what we're going to land on. So out of the trait perspective unit, of course, knowing those previous people is valuable, but these are going to be the big kahunas. These are the must-know individuals for the trait perspective. So this is called the 5-factor model of personality traits. It's put together by 2 gentlemen, Robert McCrae and Paul Costa. And so they've used factor analysis to whittle down a list of personality traits to a list of 5. Okay, so these are collectively known as the Big 5. Some people use acronyms such as OCEAN or CANOE as a way to kind of remember the list. I would say for you, it's important not only to know this list of 5, but to understand what these 5 traits actually mean. So let's quickly go through them. So you have the Big 5, again, OCEAN or CANOE. I've written these down here, not in any particular order, so we're just going to start with E, extroversion. So extroversion is basically the grouping for any positive emotions under this theory. So any positive emotions, but things like friendliness and happiness and being outgoing, those are things that would fall under extroversion. The next one is N. So the N is for neuroticism. Okay, neuroticism is the grouping for negative emotions. These are generally negative emotions within. So something such as an anxiety, for example, would fall under neuroticism. Next, we have O for openness to experience. Openness to experience, is someone who is imaginative, someone who is a dreamer. You could think of like, are you someone who would daydream and think about all the possibilities of your life? That's going to be openness or openness to experience. Then we go to the A, the next one. A stands for agreeableness. So agreeableness is really about someone's level of empathy. How helpful are they versus how are they not very unhelpful, I guess would be the opposite. So are you helpful? Do you have empathy or not so much? Do you come across as more aggressive or more empathetic and helpful to people's plight? And then lastly, we have the C. The C stands for conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is a very valuable skill. It is basically saying that you have a level of self-discipline or constraint to control yourself or control your behavior. So you might find somebody who is doing really well in school, somebody who manages their time, somebody who can study effectively. They may be a very conscientious person. They may have a level of constraint and self-discipline required to excel at any task at a high level if they committed themselves. Okay, so that's the 5-factor model of personality traits. we've got a few more things to look at here, and that's basically just some various types of personality assessments. So there are two types of personality assessment categories that you should be familiar with. One is called a self-report inventory, and then the second is known as a projective test. So these are a few examples of some of the self-report inventories. It's not as critical that you know all of these examples per se, but it can't hurt you. What is important is that you know the two types of personality assessments. Again, that's the self-report inventory, and then that is the projective test. So what is a self-report inventory? It's very easy. If you've ever taken a true-false test or an agree-disagree or a yes or no survey, that's self-reporting. You read a question, you answer yes or no, true or false, so you're responding with your own feedback to the question. So you can see some examples here. And then the other category I was telling you, this is the projective test. So the most famous one you've probably heard of for this projective testing is the Inkblot test. That's the Rorschach Inkblot test. But also the TAT, the thematic apperception test, also falls under this one. So now what you're going to do with the projective test is you're going to actually respond to a vague or ambiguous stimuli, and then this is going to, in interpretation, reveal certain needs, feelings, and traits. And these are not the only two. There are some other ones. There is the draw a sentence test. There is, not draw a sentence, sorry. There's the draw a picture test, excuse me. And then there is the finish a sentence test. And so these are not self-reporting. These are not survey-based in the sense that you read a question and you say yes or no. So they fall under the projective category. I will show you a couple examples of both of these. First, we have some examples of the TAT. Some of them you may remember from a previous video. So again, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you see this image, or possibly this one, or possibly this one? So those are some examples of the TAT. Again, you're welcome to pause the video and kind of analyze them and think about it if you would like. But then we get to the Rorschach Inkblot test. This is the most widely used projective test, despite the fact that it's very difficult for some people to be trained on interpreting these, and it's very subjective. Projective tests in general are a bit subjective, so you're going to run into some problems with that. But let me show you a couple examples of Rorschach Inkblot. What you would essentially do is state out loud what you see in the picture and the first thing that comes to mind. So here's an example of one. All right, we'll go to another one. And another one. And maybe one more. For me, whenever I see this one, now that you've had a chance to look at it, I, for some reason, see the little character from the Lilo and Stitch movie, or perhaps a koala bear with like a baby's rattle or a candied apple in his lap. There's a koala for reference. And then one more time, that guy, so cute. All right. And then there's actually a last one that has a little bit of color. Normally they're in black and white, but it's not impossible for them to have some color. All right, so now you've seen some Rorschach Inkblot tests, and so I will leave you with this final point. So often I have students who ask questions about horoscopes, or their astrological sign, or what about psychics? Is any of that stuff real? The answer is pretty simple, and that is a resounding no. And so what happens is many horoscopes, astrological signs, these are written as vague and stocky. The purpose of that is to get people to align with basically anything and really see themselves in anything. And so there's a name for this when you start falling victim to some of those descriptions and you're thinking, oh, I'm an Aries, or I'm a Taurus, or a Gemini. But you're not, most likely. You are instead falling victim to something known as the Barnum Effect. And the Barnum Effect is when we have this tendency to see ourselves in things where stocky, vague descriptions are written about people. But I could say, hey, who in class thinks that they are a Capricorn? And then I could read out the description for Taurus, and someone might think, oh, yeah, that's me. But it's not. Okay, so that's all. Thank you for joining me for this first lesson on psychology's personality theory and personality unit. I hope you will stay with me and come back for the final videos. As always, stay safe and adios.